Simon, almost a week after the budget, I know last week you sat down with the other corporate finance partners to share your thoughts when the budget was initially announced, but with a bit more time to sort of reflect on what was said and sort of see the papers over the weekend. What are your overall takeaways, do you think, from 2021 budget?
Yeah, thanks, Molly. I think my big takeaway is really it's not so much about tax at the moment. It's much more about actually we've got a bridging period. We've got an opportunity here where the Chancellor has really wanting successful businesses to invest into their business. And yes, there'll be tax rises ahead, but actually for the next couple of years, he's really encouraging us to invest and grow. Of course, it's quite clever because that means that if we grow over the next couple of years, there'll then be plenty for profits for him to tax at a higher rate of tax. So he's not stupid. But actually, I think it's a really good opportunity. And I hope that many of our clients will take it as that. They won't just batten down the hatches, but instead they'll say, okay, well, here we've got an opportunity to resource up, to actually use some of those special deductions that the Chancellor, super deductions, I think he uses the phrase. So where we can invest in our businesses by way of capital expenditure, now for some that might be a new factory or new equipment for their factory. For others, that might just be a really good upgrade of all the IT and creating a lot of efficiency from that. But by doing so, actually really giving us a good chance to grow quickly as the economy recovers over the next few years from the shock of COVID. So I do see it as opportunity. I do see it as actually we've been given a bridge that doesn't mean we're paying extra tax now, quite the opposite. We've got an opportunity for a couple of years of paying less tax by way of relief for investment. And yes, there'll be a long-term consequence, but we can be much more prepared for that then.
Great. Are there any areas for immediate concern, do you think, for particularly owner-managed businesses?
Yeah, I guess one particular point that we are aware of is that as businesses are really beginning to pick up again, as lockdown ends in the coming weeks, hopefully, and particularly sectors around leisure and food get going again, and obviously the rest of the retail sector. What we need to watch out for is the risks of overtrading. It's really the period when cash flow is actually the tightest because of the need to fund new orders as you start selling stock, the need to wait for those customers who are paying on credit to pay you, and also as just the wage bill suddenly is back, you no longer got furlough protecting your wage bill. So all of those things are going to hit. Now, the government has again helped us by extending furlough where you don't have employees that are able to contribute valuable work at the moment, or extending the credit terms a bit longer around things like the period before landlords can take action. So there's lots of bits of support there, and obviously in the very short term there's still additional support for retail and leisure that was announced last week again for the next quarter until the lockdown ends. So I think it's really, we'll have said it many times through the pandemic, cash is king, and cash is even more important as you then begin to recover and trading picks up, because as I say, you need to be able to order the next stock sometimes before you've had payment for the sales you're making today. And I guess the extra point around that at the moment, or the extra 2 or 3 points around that, is credit insurance is less available, or has been less available. Then Brexit is causing some delays, just simple delays in getting goods in, and certainly extra paper trails. And in some parts of the world, COVID is still meaning goods being produced overseas are just not getting here as quickly. And so all of that can have a negative impact still, even as we come out of the UK lockdown and see trading pick up. So understanding your supply chain, understanding the cash flow implications of that, and then just being wary to not advance credit too much. Just be braver, I think, with customers. Interestingly, as a business, we found that actually by being brave and just saying to clients, particularly new clients, we need a payment on account as we begin work, you get very few objections to that. So perhaps this is back to where we need to run some of those old-fashioned rules about a discount for cash payment immediately. A little bit of a discount for paying cash and not taking credit will be very valuable at the moment in terms of generating cash rather than giving credit.
Would you say, I know we've spoken about this before, but would you say that really taking some time to invest into cash flow forecasting over the next, almost on a rolling monthly basis is imperative at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. If not weekly. I think the ideal cash flow forecasting is a combination of always having a full 13-week cash flow ahead of you, getting you through the whole of the next quarter, particularly for businesses that run their VAT on a quarterly payment basis. But also perhaps if that's the cycle for your roughly for your debtor days or your creditor days, i.e. how long it takes for you to get paid and how long you have to pay your creditors. A 13-week cycle where you're looking at cash every week within that gives you the ability to manage that. It just ensures that those peak days in the month when quite often you find payroll, maybe the rent bill and even the VAT return are all due very close together. How does that work? And sometimes that can provide you with some very simple solutions around how you can manage that, which might be just to move the monthly payment run to your suppliers or split it in two, or even split it in four and pay your suppliers weekly, and use that tool, for instance, to actually encourage your suppliers to give you more credit by promising them weekly payments, not monthly payments. So there definitely is a 13-week cash flow is a very useful tool, and it really doesn't have to be very complex. It's a list of your direct debits, and it's a weekly view on the payments to your customers and from your to your suppliers and from your customers. And then a longer term plan that is really just saying, well, what's the overall build up on a monthly basis, and what's the direction of travel with cash over the next 12 to 24 months? What might it enable me to do? Does it give me the ability to take on some debt that I can then start to repay? And equally, if you've got a bounce back loan or a CBILS loan or deferred VAT from the pandemic, then actually you might be in a relatively relaxed period at the moment because either you've got the repayments on the CBILS or bounce back loans haven't yet started, but you probably have got those 11 months of extra VAT payments coming through for the deferred VAT that you agreed with the revenue. And if on top of that your rent has been frozen and you need to start repaying rent in some ways this summer, and I think landlords will be far less lenient once they see your business generating income to give you comfort or advance you any further credit, if you like, or even rent-free periods once you're generating revenue. It's pretty no-brainer for a landlord to do that when you aren't generating enough cash to pay him his rent. But once you are generating cash, he wants to know why you're paying somebody else rather than him if you're trying to get a further sub of him. So all of those things in a monthly and an annual cash flow actually then become very relevant, because week to week, if we go back to the week to week, maybe in the next 13 weeks you haven't got to pay any loans back, so they won't be featuring in that cash flow in the short term, but they are coming.
Yes, exactly. You can't be lulled into a false sense of security at the moment and start spending money that you don't ultimately have.
Yeah, I think because credit is going to be more and more difficult to come by, especially when the government stops providing guarantees. Now, again, one of the positive announcements from last week was the new guarantee loan scheme. but as yet we haven't seen the detail of that. So we don't quite know what the small print will be on that. Positive sign again from the government to recognise that the further borrowing is going to be required, but the question mark remains. It's all very well layering debt into businesses, but that just leaves the problem for later. What we've not yet seen, and maybe this is a side issue, but what we've not yet seen is sort of any alternatives to repaying the debt on the schedules that were first put forward. We've heard the hint from the government that CBILS loans might be able to be spread over more than the 5-year period that they were originally advanced on, but again, haven't really seen any practical evidence of that happening yet. So certainly for me, I think we've got a lot of businesses where they won't be able to repay debt in the current form within the timescale agreed. They might be able to repay debt eventually, but carrying down your balance sheet is a negative, and that carrying that debt as debt might not help businesses grow. Maybe converting that to a tax or even to equity might be a better way, and that's happened at some of the larger business levels and in other jurisdictions. I was looking at an Irish scenario earlier on, where the Irish Strategic Investment Fund has been taking equity stakes in not huge businesses, but in owner-managed businesses, instead of just putting debt in. And you know what? That makes a bit more sense to help businesses recover, is not just to layer them with debt.
Yes. Yeah.
But we'll see. The UK government hasn't taken that route yet, other than in a small manner with the Future Fund for a narrow group of businesses backed by private equity funding.
So just sort of coming back to your earlier point in terms of like your key takeaway, would you say that sort of in light of that COVID has provided a little bit of a sort of a reset in thinking for many business owners?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's provided a great reset, whether you've been positively or negatively impacted by COVID. So, some very simple examples are actually how we've all adapted to working on video so much more means that the office environment is up for major question as to whether, not whether we'll go back to the office. We will go back to the office. Very, very few people will now work from home forever. But mixed mode working and the way you use the office, I think we're all seeing the value of the collaborative and meeting time in the office. But many of us are equally wondering what other uses there are for the office, i.e. if you're just got to sit with your head down at a desk and you don't need training and you're not having to give training at the moment, then actually maybe working from home for an awful lot of people will be a better environment. However, if you're a young family around you, clearly that is unlikely to be the case. So challenges there around the reset. Challenges about where we employ people. The traditions of everybody needs to be able to get to the office every day, i.e. it's got to be commutable. Well, I think we've suddenly realized that maybe that isn't quite as important as we used to think. And I was having this debate in our own team even this morning, recognizing that actually just moving people between our offices sometimes, which we would see as nothing at all, would still mean a 2-hour commute for some people. Well, if we drew a 2-hour commuting circle around each of our offices and compare that to where we currently think about recruiting our teams from, they're two very different things. The challenge I got back on that straight away was, well, what about local networks and things? And that whilst that is important for bits of our business, equally, if that were the only thing that was important, we wouldn't worry about using our websites to try and advertise for clients outside of our local region, and yet we do. So there's one little reset there. I think a different one would be thinking about where we can go and do business in the future. What's the environments under which actually we can now see we can do business in a way that we couldn't see before. And some of that's directly related to COVID, some of it's just related to some of the indirect impacts of COVID. We have clients in the leisure sector at the moment providing sort of fun to do, which whether it be something as simple as a bowling alley or a trampolining park, that actually retailers have suddenly realised maybe we could be using these in the shopping centres to draw people into our shopping centres that are increasingly empty of the big brands that used to draw us in the future. I think that might be orientated particularly towards getting husbands and boyfriends into shops whilst wives and girlfriends enjoy the shopping, and the husbands can go and look after the children doing something bouncing or sporty, but in the same place. Pretty clever idea, actually, in my mind. Probably will work in my family. But again, a reset that perhaps has been partly caused by the changes we've seen on the high street because of COVID, and the change to online shopping, which has been sped up hugely by COVID. And there again, we've got another area. Everything has suddenly become more acceptable to buy online. Who of the audience listening to this video is now used to the daily, if not more than daily, delivery from Amazon at home? There just seems to be a succession of courier companies around our neighbourhood these days, and we recognise the white van man now because they come around so regularly. But the real point is actually, shopping has become very, very personal. It's become totally 24/7. And we're getting less and less surprised by being able to order something today and for it to be, well, at the moment we think delivered tomorrow is good. No doubt soon we'll think that's not good enough and we want delivered today for rather than tomorrow. And we're beginning to see that in our cities. So our demands are changing, our focus is changing, and there is opportunity in that. Now, clearly there's also businesses that are threatened by that. And I'm sure that many of us are feeling a little bit more like supporting our local high streets or our local craftsmen, and recognizing that actually they have a dual market, but we can use them ourselves. And certainly I found myself going to the local butcher more often, and enjoying doing that, maybe because it was an outing in lockdown, but there's lots of changes going on there.
Yeah, no, I'm the same. I've started getting a veg box once a week, and it's my favourite time of the week. It's sad, really, but okay. And so, how do you think that? So you've given a couple of examples there, but how do you think that will manifest for businesses that have struggled over the last 12 months?
So those that have struggled will have had a long, hard look at their businesses, and some of them will have adapted themselves in that time. I suspect many of us have seen restaurants turning into takeaways, even pubs turning into takeaways, and I think there's some easy, quick lessons there about the way actually many of our businesses can do more than one thing. That they thought they could only do one thing, serve meals to people sitting at tables inside their building. Well, they've adapted to much better use of the street outside, and of the neighbours walking past, and also things like Deliveroo in cities that have clearly become hugely popular. In fact, I've noticed walking through or cycling through Cambridge now, the most busiest part of Cambridge is around where the restaurants are, are now surrounded by bikers and mopeds delivering deliveries all over Cambridge. Well, that wasn't there a year ago, anywhere near that amount. But there's also the businesses that have recognised that they may be outdated and need to pivot from that. And sometimes that reset's just vital to actually bring a bit of realism to businesses that actually were moving in the wrong direction anyway. But also there's some really simple things like, and I think I might have said it earlier, just simple things like cash collection. if you advance credit, well, that means you're not getting the cash today. So which is more important, the revenue or the cash? There's a lot of focus often on sales, but that only matters if they pay, and cash is king. So some important messages there. Focus on how do you generate cash, and how do you generate value, and that sometimes will be about quality rather than quantity. So long hard look. I guess the honest point is you've probably had time to look at your business, because it's been shut or in you've had time to spruce it up. You've had time to think about who your real customers ought to be and adapt to that market. And if you haven't examined that, well, why not, firstly? But secondly, well, maybe you've still got time to do. If you're still in lockdown at the moment, we've got another month before most things reopen. Well, that month is 24, 25 working days or 30-ish actual days. We can do a lot. We did a lot last year when we went into lockdown, with very little notice. So actually, you now know what your opening day could be. Work towards that, but don't just work towards it on the old rules. Work towards it on the best rules for today.
And also for we've come out of lockdown once, so if you've survived that first coming out of lockdown, you should be able to survive this one, and you've got an opportunity presumably to learn from any lessons of, okay, that didn't go quite right, or that didn't do us any favors, or actually something that you were mentioning earlier when you and I were just talking about, like, actually we didn't miss that. We need that for our business. Yeah,
that's right. I mean, that's certainly something that a lot of us have noticed, the things that you've barely used, in an office environment, barely used the printers. So actually, if you haven't got a printer at home and you haven't printed anything out in the last year, presumably there's no real reason why you need to print something out when you go back into the office then. One of our managing directors' classic ones is the stamp bill. We've barely posted a thing in the last year. So we absolutely would be horrified if the post bill suddenly rockets the moment we go back into the office. Because what is it that we suddenly now need to post that we haven't needed to post in the last year? It's a really good point. That doesn't mean no postage whatsoever, but it does mean kind of let's not fall into the old rules. In our business, again, the use of signing things digitally and sending everything out digitally has been a fantastic efficiency that we have seen. And we could have done that 5 years ago, but we didn't. We didn't do it until we were forced to do it. But it's been a very, very good tool yet. And I'm sure we spend far less on licenses for PDF signatures than we do on postage and paper and printers to print the paper to put in the envelope to send to the customer with a stamp, which causes delay, and then things get lost in the post and they didn't get signed right in the first place, etc. And you all repeat blah 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 blah. A really simple thing, but in our business that will have created massive efficiencies that we must not fall back into the trap of going back to now. An occasional client will still want us to send out a hand copy, and fine, for client service that's fine, but not for routine.
Yes, it'll be a very interesting conversation to have with anyone who now says, oh well, I can't go paperless.
Yes,
look at the last 12 months. What were we doing?
Yes.
Unfortunately, people haven't got a leg to stand on some of these arguments anymore. So yes, and okay, so that's sort of the businesses that have struggled. What about those that have done okay or thrived?
Yeah, so I guess they fall into two categories. Those that are really just COVID has fallen into their lap in a very nice way. So Ocado and has done very well out of lockdown because everybody's moved their shopping online. But and that might reverse a bit. In fact, the stock share price of Ocado has stopped growing and certainly shrunk back a bit since lockdown. The end of lockdown became more promising. But at the same time, many businesses that have got things right in lockdown are actually as strong today, if not stronger than they were a year ago. we probably include ourselves in that at Price Bailey. And what we recognise is that actually we had a series of actions that we took very seriously right at the start of lockdown, which in very simple terms, we've collected our debtors in quicker. We have billed our work in progress out quicker. I don't think that's had any detriment on our clients. It's actually just we've found the efficiencies in our business ourselves. The result of that means that we've got far less debt in our business right now, or more to the point, we have far more debt capacity. So that enables us to think seriously about acquisitions and funding growth. And so rather than just thinking about coming out of lockdown, we're still going to have one eye on the cliff of danger that everybody still feels is around the corner with the economy. But on the other hand, we can have an eye on, well, but if we don't fall off that cliff, and we didn't fall off the cliff a year ago when the abyss of COVID first hit, well, actually, maybe we've got a real opportunity to grow our business through acquisition. And on top of that, if we then think about our offices we've now recognised we probably have a lot more capacity to grow in our offices, given that some people will continue to work from home on a fairly full-time basis. Lots of people will probably work from home on a part-time basis. And there'll still be some people that will work from the office on a full-time basis, but wherever that lies, it's not everybody in the office full-time, which is where we were. So that gives us office capacity, and it also means things like, could we now begin to employ people that don't live in East Anglia or London to work in our business? That suddenly starts to become a real game changer when we're struggling to recruit the right talent locally. And so I think in that there's a number of really interesting opportunities that we've had our eyes open to that we want to exploit in the best possible way in the months ahead. And I think it is the months ahead. We can't afford to just come out of lockdown and sit on our laurels, because if we do that, we will fall back into the old rules. And for many of us, I think that's the most dangerous thing we could do at the moment. Why do we want to lose the efficiencies and the effectiveness that we have gained? We want to combine those efficiencies with the bits we've been missing, the collaboration, the teaching, the social time with our colleagues, the ability to go and see clients when we want to, when it's appropriate to have a face-to-face conversation, but also not to do so when actually all we just need something we could do on a video call. So there will not be a single answer about when do you go to a client and when do you just do a video call. The question is, have you thought about it? Have you actually made an active decision to say, no, this is a meeting I really would be best done in person, or this is a meeting I'm just collecting some data, it's a quick one, I can just do a video call and ask them to share a screen and send me an email with the data. We don't need to go out to a client that might take half an hour to drive to and half an hour to drive back from just to go and collect a bit of data. We do need to go and see that client to have a delicate conversation or a strategy conversation, or what we might call a whiteboarding type conversation, where we're kind of trying to get the juices flowing in a very wide-ranging discussion, which can be quite difficult on Zoom.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Yeah, that's about the examples. That's fine. Finally, what's your predictions for how this focus on encouraging investment and the sort of reset tied in with the period of lower tax will impact particularly M&A in the future, but also private equity, if you want to comment on that as well?
Well, there's plenty of M&A opportunity now, but that will become even more prevalent as confidence recovers. M&A is driven by confidence, and when people are confident about the future, they will invest. Now, different people will get that confidence at different times, so very risk hungry investors will be investing now, because they'll see that we're close to the bottom of the market, and they'll see lots of upside ahead. Even knowing that there is that cliff of the economic impact still to be felt from COVID, because government has protected it too much up to now. So there's that level. But equally, we will see those with a lower risk appetite also come back to the M&A as soon as they do see the positive signs. And the first of those positive signs is going to be the end of lockdown. The next of those is going to be actually back end of this year, when the growth statistics for GDP start to appear in the press. And instead of the ones we're seeing at the moment about contractions and negativity, we're actually seeing positive signs coming through. We continue, and we're likely to continue in a period of very low interest rates and low inflation. So growth is going to be driven by activity, not by just passivity, if you like. So I think we will see an increasing desire for that. And in our experience, owner-managed businesses in particular come out of difficult times in the economy quicker, and they often therefore will be ripe for the fastest way for the larger organisations to grow is to acquire some of those smaller ones that are growing fast. So I would expect the M&A to pick up quite considerably in sort of the next 6 to 12 months. Not that it's been particularly as negative as we thought it might have been. The last 6 months, we've already seen a pickup. We've already seen overseas buyers, for instance, looking into the UK and being active. And maybe that's telling, because the UK is one of the last major Western countries that is still in a hard lockdown. Now bits of Europe are still struggling as well, but the US is already fairly open. And although there is still a major COVID problem in the US, they're not in lockdown in the same way as we have been in the UK. And so maybe it's not surprising that we're seeing investment coming from the US quite actively, and we're working on US-based deals at the moment. And I'm aware of lots more. In fact, every day at the moment, I'm hearing about more US activity heading to the UK and Europe.
With so at the moment, we continue to have sort of lower tax. They're not raising taxes yet for a little while. Do you think that might, when they do, when we know that it's going to go back up again, do you think that might trigger a bit of a seller's market?
I think we've got a false one around capital gains tax. Not false. We've got a capital gains tax impact. There continue to be expectations that capital gains tax will get increased in the UK, and some of the tax incentives around entrepreneurial business will be removed or reduced. So that will have a short-term impact on the M&A activity, a sort of a false bubble. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest issue. But the UK is still, even with a 25% tax rate, still not a high tax environment for business. And actually, I think the UK is one of the first countries to really announce a full reaction to, in tax terms, to COVID and the need to start paying back all the government subsidies. So I saw an article about the difference between Northern Ireland taxation and Southern Ireland taxation in 2025 being, Southern Ireland is 12% tax rate, Northern Ireland will be a 25% tax rate. I can't believe that Ireland will be able to hang on to its 12% tax rate. I suspect you will find that Ireland will be putting their tax rate up already. That was already something that was being talked about pre-COVID, that the Irish couldn't sustain their tax rate at the low level. And when you look to Europe and you look to the US, actually, the UK's tax rate, even once it's at 25%, is not a high tax rate. So although it feels like, and it's a nice nice headline grabber to be talking about a huge increase from 19% to 25%, and the change of Tory policy from a low tax environment to one taxing at 25%. Well, I think that's one way that the spin hasn't quite got it right, because 25% is still not a high tax environment. It might be currently what we would see as a sort of a mid-rate tax, I suppose. But there's also quite a lot of suspicion that they might never actually get to 25%. And in 2 years' time, if the economy is able to pick up a bit, then the tax take might be sufficient that 25% might actually never need to be 25%. It might be 23, which I think is what most people were expecting to see corporation tax go to in the last few weeks, or maybe 24. So we'll see. I don't think that 25% tax rate is actually going to be very damaging for the UK economy. I think in many ways it's just a recognition that something has to be happening. He's put some shock news out there with the 25%, and maybe he'll never need to get as far as that.